Greetings to my fellow piece blunderers, and today I'm showing you 5 tips all related to piece exchanges. When is it good to exchange pieces? When is it bad to exchange pieces? All of that we're going to discuss. I'll be talking strictly about piece exchanges of equal value. We're not covering exchange sacrifices or any kind of sacrifices whatsoever. We are talking bishop for bishop, queen for queen, knight for bishop, etc, etc. Anyway, let's start with tip number 1, the most obvious one arguably, but still, do not make exchanges that improve your opponent's position. And looking at the board now, looking at white's position specifically, we could say that it's not the best. Black is slightly better in this position, and it's not hard to see why, mainly because of the broken up pawn structure on the queen side. Now, in this position, white made a move that is not even in the top 5 engine moves, which seems innocuous, but in reality, it makes the position much worse, which is just takes the bishop on f6. Now, usually when you exchange pieces, you want to gain something. In this position, after knight takes f6, it's hard to see what white exactly has gained. In fact, what happened is that white improved black's position. Before the exchange, black's pieces were a little bit tied up. If we play something like bishop a4, for example, it kind of pins the knight a little bit, maybe creates a problem. Yes, this problem can be addressed, but still it stops black from expanding quickly. It just asks black a couple of questions, and bishop a4 is indeed the engine's best move in this position. However, going back, why would you ever want to get rid of your bishop in a way so that it develops the black's knight? And not only that, probably the rook exchange is going to follow, maybe not. And if the rook exchange is going to follow, let's say a rook takes, we have just got rid of the 2 pieces. We had 6, now we have 4, which is really bad news for us, because the fewer pieces we have, the closer we are to the endgame. And this is another point that is hidden inside this tip, is that we don't want to exchange pieces and go into an endgame where we are going to be worse, but more on that later. And at the end of the day, if we go back to the exchange, now takes, the knight on d7 was a little bit also making the rook impaired, but on f6 is absolutely brilliant. And don't forget that now that the bishop is no longer on d4, we don't have this bishop, this pawn doesn't have as much support. This pawn is basically on a dark square, and not having a dark squared bishop removes one defender, which may be the key defender in the position. Tip number 2, do not exchange pieces only to liquidate to a worse endgame. Have you had these positions before where it would just like takes, and after the dust settles and literally 10 pieces went off the board in 10 moves, you realize you've exchanged yourself to completely lose an endgame and you're just sitting there crying. Now, in this position, it's white to move, and it's very obvious that white wants to move their bishop. Without moving the bishop, this rook will never ever get out on a1. And something like knight takes c5 as an intermezzo is ill-advised, because if we do, there is another intermezzo, this time by black, coming with rook d1 check, and the position is a little bit shaky now. This bishop is pinned, this rook is having difficulties to get out. It's very unpleasant for white. So we want to move the bishop. The question is, where do we want to move it? In the sample game, what happened was white moved the bishop to the e3 square, which is not a good idea. It kind of provokes this exchange, which does happen. And now, after rook d3, the question is, why was that exchange ever necessary? This rook is now dominant, attacking that weak isolated pawn. And yes, we can defend it with something like king f2, but now the rook has got all the liberty to slide into something like b3, and now attacking this pawn and still eyeing this pawn just in case. This rook is a monster, and we should not have allowed that. And this is an easy thing to say. Instead, what we should have done is we should have played something like bishop d2, much more humble, not allowing that exchange, not ruining our pawn structure. And this bishop can go to c3, for example, eyeing this diagonal, very good diagonal. Instead, though, bishop e3 is a move that is inaccurate and is ultimately not that great. Always keep an eye for this, because It may seem like, okay, I exchange bishops, but when bishops do get exchanged, and then you see rook g3 on the board, you're like, haha, oh crap, why did I do that? Don't ever go into your exchanges with a mindset, okay, takes, and then when it does happen, I'll figure it out. No! You, before the exchange, look into takes, and then look into what is going to happen. It's not a good idea to look at what's going to happen after the exchange takes place. Tip number 3, and it's going to be again quite easy to understand, a rather obvious one, but trust me, even I fall into that trap sometimes, and when it happens, it's extremely annoying. Thus, I need to state it and I need to stress it. When you make tactical exchanges, make sure that you've considered every possible option and make sure that it 100% works. What I mean by that is the following. In this position, I play as white. Queen takes f6 with check, queen blocks with e7, queen e7, that is. And at this moment in time, I was like, oh boy, I was rubbing my hands because what I was looking at was the following. So I wanted to exchange queens so that I lure the king out into trouble. So queen takes, king takes. I'm like, haha, something like bishop h7 discovered check, and now I'm hitting the rook and I'm super happy. However, some of you may have seen the problem with that already is that after we make this tactical exchange with queen takes e7, king doesn't have to take. I forgot to look at knight takes e7 and I'm completely losing. Now I did manage to scramble a win somehow, but it's not that relevant anymore. The point is, anyone is vulnerable to these sort of things, especially under time pressure. And you may say, well, it was very silly of you to miss knight takes e7, but I want to ask you the question, like, has it ever happened to you? It just happened to me. I bet it has, so you better watch it. Don't make tactical exchanges until you make sure that they are functional. Tip number 4, don't be obsessed with having the bishop pair. Now, if we look at this position, black plays knight f6 and white plays e5. Very aggressive, the best move. Attacking that knight on f6 and asking it some questions. Now, the knight has to move and it has 2 best possible candidate moves for that, knight g4 and knight d5. It doesn't seem like that big of a difference, but in reality, if you think far enough, you will realize that these moves lead to different piece exchanges, which is very important. Now, knight g4, attacking that bishop on e3 outright, will probably sooner or later result in us taking that bishop, something like queen e2 defending. Okay, we don't have to capture it immediately, but if, I don't know, if we castled or something like that, and if white played something like h3, we will be forced into making a decision, probably, I don't want to retreat back to h6, we would have probably taken. And what it means for us is that, yes, we got the bishop pair, which is nice, but at what cost? This bishop on e3 is not very good. It's not very good at all. It's hiding behind its own pawns. And yes, it can become maybe a little bit better in the future, sure. But if we go back a little, I would easily prefer the knight d5 move. Now, the knight d5 still attacks that bishop, surely, but most likely, after knight d5 follows, we would see knight takes d5 by white, because white would find it really, really attractive to just capture that knight on d5, which is very good. The knight on d5 is a very good knight. White would probably like to get rid of it. And after bishop takes, yes, both players still have the bishop pair, but the bottom line is our bishops are just better. I don't know by how much, but they are definitely better. I mean, this bishop is very good. This bishop is going to become good very soon, whereas this bishop is kind of stuck on e3, at least for now, and staring at the backside of its own pawns. Yeah, so in my opinion, it is much better for us as black if this c3 knight goes away than this e3 bishop. And the closing tip, number 5, connected to the previous point about bishops and knights, don't be afraid of conceding the bishop pair. Don't be afraid of exchanging even a very good bishop for your opponent's knight if you are fighting for the center. If we look at this position, for example, the fianchettoed bishop on g7 isn't usually the bishop that you want to exchange. However, what we can see in this position is black struggling a little bit, and one of the few sources of counterplay for black is against that e4 pawn in the center, right? And how can this pawn be defended? Well, at the moment, it is defended by these knights on c3 and on g5. Both of them are in quite precarious positions. Well, this knight can get kicked out, maybe, at some point. And this knight, well, we're just going to capture it, which is the engine's best move in this position by far. Yes, it's a shame to lose that bishop on g7, but if you think about it, it's okay. It's okay because this knight on c3 no longer has the grip on the center, and this pawn becomes a little bit shakier. A similar position comes from my favorite Alakai's defense. I can talk about it all day. From the 4 pawns variation, to be precise, in this position, the best move for white to play is h3, asking questions of that bishop, and the best move for black to play is just to take the knight. Again, we are conceding the bishop pair willingly, but for a very good reason. We are going to pressure that pawn on e5 massively, and the problem with pressuring the e5 pawn with the knight being on f3 is that the knight is very good at defending that pawn. Well, not anymore. We're getting rid of that knight, and we are then going to put a bit more pressure onto that pawn with something like knight b6 to d7, which makes a lot of sense. Now, this video, of course, doesn't cover everything there is to piece exchanges, but if you so wish, if you like this one, if you found this one useful, I can easily do a sequel containing 5 more tips, let's say. And if you just so happened to find this video useful, also please like and subscribe, follow me on Twitch. I stream Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. Find me on chess.com, join our Discord, all of that good stuff. But I'm going to talk to you very soon, my favorite unintentional gambiteers. Love you all. See you in the next one.